you know, you're going to get the band back together again. Why the fuck we want to do that? It was a bizarre piece of equipment. I mean, the technique, it's almost like something Leonardo da Vinci would have made, minus the electric motor, with somebody doing that. In a world that was becoming slowly used to Moog synthesizers. So it never really took off as a piece of technology. Yeah, a few people used it. I mean, Jimmy Page used it. Susie and the Banshees used it. A few people used it. It did crop up all over the place for a short period of time.
I was fascinated to know how the Gizmotron ended up with Paul McCartney.
When we were recording sheet music, Paul was working at Strawberry at night, creating an album with his brother Mike. At the point where we crossed over, we left and he came in, we would share stories and play each other's stuff. And I think that's where he saw the Gizmotron.
He actually used it on one of his albums, 1979, on London Town, I'm Carrying, which is one of my favourite tracks of Paul's. So interested to know what took him so long to actually use it. Was it that temperamental, or did it just suit the treatment of the song that he was doing at the time?
I honestly don't. Maybe it took that long to get to be friends with it. I don't know. It was a pretty crude mechanical device. That was its failing, and it was very prone to temperature change, the weather, anyone touching it, you name it. It could sound like a chainsaw if it wasn't treated with respect.
What was it like working with Peter Cook during that time?
Bonkers. Pete, lovely guy, but fond of a drink. But how it seemed to work was Pete would come in the morning and record something. We'd wake up, go down to the studio and hear what he'd done, and then we would react to that. So by the next morning, you would have something that was both music and comedy at the same time. And it would seem to continue for that period of time throughout, not the whole 14 months or however long it took, because he wasn't there that long. We would do something the way we worked, the two of us mostly, and then Peter would respond to it and vice versa. And then we would listen together and then make adjustments and learn from what we just did. Not that different to just writing music in a way. First video we made, and we didn't really direct it, was for a track called An Englishman in New York. And we only came up with the idea of doing a film because we weren't a touring band. It was the only thing we could think of to promote it in some way. And there wasn't that many places where a film could be shown. There were things like Whistle Test. And we got to sort of understand how that worked, much as we did with understanding how a studio worked from working at the early days of Strawberry Studios and just being there, seeing what happened. We were lucky. We just happened to be in the right place at the right time. We're ballsy enough to try and do something. And we had a hit in Europe with Englishman in New York because of the video. And we knew other people who were thinking along the same lines who came to us and asked us to do stuff purely because we were musicians, not because we were video directors. We hadn't done much, but they felt they could communicate with us.
Yeah, hi Kevin. So I know you famously directed Real Love, where you got to meet three of them, and presumably you've met John at some stage over the years. I'm not sure, but I would be interested to know what you make of them as people, because us Beatles fans, we feel we know them very well as musicians and singers, but we don't really know them personally. And you had the pleasure of hanging out with them a bit, so could you just give us your impressions?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Real Love, right?
Yeah.
All that wonderful studio footage of them larking around and recording at Paul's place, I didn't film that. I wasn't there.
Yeah.
What I actually filmed for Real Love were the conceptual bits, were those duplications of Yono's Smile film, where I've got them all smiling in super slow motion, and also dropping the piano into the Mersey, the conceptual bits, which I came up with as glue to hang the documentary footage on.
Yeah.
But I have been around them. I've never met John. But they were great. I mean, for a bunch of guys that changed the world and didn't set out to, but they did purely because of their talent and their guts. Surprisingly normal. Like exactly as you say, just blokes from Liverpool are great, yeah, fucking great. Maybe with a bit more foul language than you actually see. That's exactly who they were, pretty much. It's just that it happens not many times in a generation, but people come along who change things. And they were the sort of fulcrum of a lot of change in the late 1960s and all. They were like gods. If aliens came down to Earth and said to me, take me to your leader, I'd say go to Liverpool. Don't go and meet the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Because they were really sweet, they were lovely, I mean, and I see Paul every now and again. I'm seeing Ringo for ages. I never met John. They're just guys with incredible talents. And whether they've had to work hard to retain their feet on the ground, I couldn't possibly answer that question. But they are very conscious of being human, if you know what I mean. When you meet them, it's like you're looking at album covers, you're not meeting real people. But that wears off and you kind of get to know them. Yeah. I remember I also did a piece for Paul, which was a 3-screen thing for a tour he did of America. This 3-screen thing is about 50 minutes long, and it opened up their show in the States. And I was editing it at my house when I was living in England. And they'd come over every sort of couple of days and have dinner and hang out and stuff. And, he's a creative guy like me. Well, not like me, but, somewhat ahead of me in many ways. But there's common ground. So, and he's a lovely guy. They were all lovely guys. The 3 I knew were lovely guys.
Great.
Kevin, did you ever get a sense that Paul was a fan of 10cc? I've heard stories, he sent you a bouquet of flowers apparently when I'm Not in Love got to #1. There's these various stories that you read about. I mean, did he ever talk to you about 10cc's music and highlight any songs that he liked? Or
I think so. As I said, when we were recording sheet music, that crossover period where our day ended and his night began, but we'd play him stuff and he'd say, "Oh, that's fucking great. That's really good." And then he'd play us stuff, and it was reciprocal. I think there was a mutual admiration for what we were doing, and of course we would say that we were hugely influenced by them, as everybody must have been at that point. If he likes you and he likes what you do, he will say. It's as simple as that. He's not a god. He's a bloke. People forget that. Even though he became a god in many ways. But don't forget, I've got God in my fucking name.
Also, I was going to ask, if you don't mind, about the Come On People video.
Yeah.
Did Paul McCartney have much input, or was it, this is my vision, or was it a collaborative thing when it came to the production and the edit? Did he have much to do with it in that respect?
None.
Okay.
Except, all I remember about that video, it was technically difficult. It was pretty much an all-night shoot because the majority of the video was the black and white section, which was done using a motion control rig, which essentially, I don't know if you know what that is, because when you see it, there is a moving camera, and Paul is playing in real time, but people are disassembling the piano at like 4 or 5 times the speed, but the movement of the camera is the same. That is a computer-driven camera that you can change. You can slow down the computer, so if you're doing the same with the film, it'll match the original shot. So it's a very complex thing to shoot. But then when we'd done all that stuff, we then had to sweep the stage clean and build this float as if it was part of the Rio Carnival. There's one point in that part of the film where Paul goes and points at something off screen. He's pointing at me because I was so knackered I tripped over a cable when I was directing him. If you watch it again, you'll see it at some point. But no, I think he had a couple of comments to make on the edit. And we added a little more stock footage of the Rio Carnival to the second part, the colourful part of the shoot. But it was a great shoot. I think everyone went home very pleased about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning.
The When We Was Fab video, Kevin, can you talk a bit about that?
People keep saying, is that Paul Simon in When We Was Fab? And I go, what? So the bloke pushing a cart of vegetables through, it's Paul Simon, isn't it? Oh, it's fucking extra. And it was the walrus. It was the walrus. That's John, isn't it? No, it was our manager at the time. You know, it's like the Beatles seem to ignite legends or myths.
Yeah.
And I still get that to this day. You're kidding now. It's Paul Simon, isn't it? No. It was Paul Simon.
You did have a few appearances, like Elton was in there, I noticed.
Yeah, Elton was in there. Ringo was in there. Yeah, exactly. But that's obvious. And they were all great. You know, they were all up for a laugh. But it worked really well. I mean, George was great. He loved it. He had a great time doing that.
Did he take much persuasion to don the Sergeant Pepper's outfit?
I don't think so. Why would he?
Post Beatles, he's obviously made comments about distancing himself in many ways from the Beatles from time to time. Obviously, his comments change as time goes on, but there was a period when he didn't want to be so associated with the Beatles and establish himself as an artist in his own right. So it's interesting to see him wear that uniform and at that time.
Yeah, it was great. I know it worked well. I mean, for the particular part of the song, I mean, the song title itself says it, doesn't it? When We Was Fab, it's taking the piss out of it a bit. So no, I think the tone was right for him to do it. I don't recall him being particularly angsty about it. No, it was the hard part was getting him into that situation where it was natural to look like he had more than 2 sets of arms. You know, it was a tricky shoot, but it was fun.
How long did the shoot last for?
The day.
Wow.
They all last a day. Or been 2 days. No, I think it was a day. But shooting-wise, it was very simple. I mean, it was just one camera locked off in a position looking at a wall, essentially. Occasionally, we may move in for a close-up. But there wasn't a lot of mechanical movement. There wasn't cameras on tracks and cranes and stuff like that. It was very simple as far as we were concerned. It was just organizing all these stars who would show up and making sure we got the bits we needed and choreograph the extra arms. That was tricky. That was difficult because they couldn't see what they were doing. There were just arms coming through a wall, so up a bit kind of thing. Very silly.
Did you get the sense working on that video, Kevin, that George was really wanting to stage some kind of comeback? I mean, he always kind of denied that it was a comeback. He always used to say, you know, I'd never really been away. But I mean, when that video came out and that album came out, it was a really big moment in his career. Did you get a sense from him working on that video that he was kind of consciously trying to build up to some kind of big splash or comeback?
No. George was always very quiet. I think he'd had a hit before we did that anyway. He had that. There was another track out here that was also a big hit.
Yeah, got my mind set.
Yeah, it was where he was sat in an armchair in front of a fire and then he'd get up and start dancing and stuff.
Yeah.
I forget what that song was. Yeah. But no, he was, you know, and the hair had changed a bit. You know, he looked a bit more 80s. And ears were apparent, you know, and no, not really. I don't. No, there was no big sense of. He just had a record out, you know. I never felt he went away because he had the huge All Things Must Pass. That was massive. He'd made his point with that album, you know.
Did you get to socialise with the three Beatles, or was it a working relationship, pure and simple?
I didn't see them very often. I mean, I saw Paul more than anybody because we lived near him at the time. I lived in Tenterden in Kent, and he lived probably about 20 minutes away. So we'd get invited to bonfire parties and stuff around at his place, which was nice. I remember we were there once and went for a wander around, and we saw Paul and George sat together playing ukuleles. And it was like heart-stopping moment. And then we'd have our baked potatoes and go back to the bonfire, you know, stuff like that. You know, I've been lucky enough to meet a lot of interesting people that I admire in my career. It is great when things like that happen. You just thank your lucky stars. But I thank my lucky stars I've lived during that time when music was that important and when culture was that important. It doesn't appear to be the case now.
I just wanted to ask you about working with Trevor Horn, because apparently you're working on something a bit more experimental at the time. I think it's called Hit the Box, and you ended up working on Cry, and also the video I really remember because it's one of the first kind of videos that's got that kind of morphing feature. It was very groundbreaking at the time. I just wanted to ask you about that period and working with Trevor Horn.
We met Trevor Horn. Lol and I were working in New York. We'd filmed a police concert, and we were in New York editing it. And he was in New York for something else as well. We were both staying at the same hotel. So at the end of the day, we'd hook up in the bar and get a bit pissed and start swapping stories and talking about stuff. And we were there for about 3 weeks and got to know each other quite well and resolved to do something when we all got back to London. And one of the things that amused us was flipping between all the different channels on American television. We thought that was pretty cool. We wondered if we could actually do something musically like that, but also film it taking place when we got back. And that was the idea. That's what Hit the Box was. But unfortunately, when you actually got back to England, there was only like 4 channels, as opposed to like 250 of them in the United States. That idea swiftly went out the window. But we had some time booked in the studio. And so Trevor asked if we had anything else. The only thing we could think of was something that we'd started writing about 15 years earlier, which was the first verse of Cry. And that's all we'd managed to get done. So we played him that. And he says, I like that. And he brought in one of his team, Steve Lipson, who had the first synclavier, I think it was. And we sort of put down this first verse and left it with Steve and went off to play table tennis and pool at the studio at Psalm. And Steve worked it into some kind of structure. Essentially what happens is working with Trevor allowed us to finish that track and turn it into a song of sorts. And using Steve and his team and Trevor's production chops, it turned into something really interesting. We'd never really been produced before. It was a great experience.
And you worked on a couple of videos as well for Trevor, and one of my favorites is the Two Tribes, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, which is phenomenal. What was it like working on that?
Insane. Well, it was mad. The original idea we had was we couldn't do, because we took the idea too literally. We were thinking of assembling almost like 2 football matches or 2 football teams, rather tooled up to the eyeballs with sort of weaponry and strange costumes, and then coming at each other from 2 sides of a football pitch. Would have cost a fortune. And we were told that in no uncertain terms. So we had to come up with something that would work. And we came up with the idea as well, wouldn't it be wonderful if the leader of the free world had a battle with the leader of the unfree world? Essentially politicians beating crap out of each other, symbolically for who's going to rule the world. And that was the idea. Surrounded by members of the world press and the band in amongst them, operating cameras and microphones and so on and so forth. Less of a band performance and more a piece of fight choreography, which is what it turned out. It went nuts though. Towards the end, there is a bit where two guys jump out of the crowd and start beating everybody up. And that actually happened. We didn't ask that to happen. Two guys just went AWOL and jumped into this little sandpit and started punching people. It's crazy. Yeah. But it was what was really interesting about it, the freedom that we were given to do whatever we wanted. And they were doing 12-inch mixes of the track at that time. And so we spent longer in the edit process because they kept sending us new versions of the mix.
Oh, yeah.
They're doing a new mix for this. Can we add some more pictures to that? And then we'd add pictures that they would bounce off and add more sound. And the final thing that was the best version, it was called the Destructo mix.
Yeah.
Which is quite extended with all sorts of things going on. The original is quite tame in comparison. But it's still one of my favorites. It's fantastic. Still
because you were remixing the video, like chopping in, kind of keep the peace, and and all that, and that was that was very experimental at the time.
It was. It took forever to do, but we were having a great time doing it, and they were saying, "Carry on, carry on." It was wonderful.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Pleasure.
I've often heard creative people, musicians and artists say that when they're not painting or creating arts or writing songs, they get a bit depressed or down. And it seems to be that creating music or art is creative people's way of dealing with their emotions in a very enviable way, because they're channeling their emotions through their art. And as you said earlier, a lot of it's very unconscious, which makes me think the unconscious things that we all deal with on a daily basis. And I struggle to find a way to process it and deal with it. It seems to me that you're lucky that you have that way of channeling it. And I wanted to ask, am I right about that? Do you find that if you're not writing songs, it affects your mental health and you get depressed, and that you need to have that way of dealing with life?
Yeah, I do. At the moment, I'm not depressed, but my eyes are shot because I spend most of my time in front of the computer, not necessarily writing songs, but coming up with ideas for other things, either editing something that I've just shot as a director and so on and so forth. If and when I'm not doing that, if and when there is no project for me to get my teeth into, then I do feel a bit useless. And I'm sure I become a bit of a pain in the bum. Because that is what I do, I feel that that's what I'm here for. I'm here to make stuff in different mediums if I can. If I'm not doing that, I don't feel whole. I don't feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm not very good at everyday things. I'm untidy. You can't see my desk, thank God, but it's like a landfill of garbage. Letters, unopened posts, fruit, drinks, all sorts of crap all over the place because I'm lazy. But if I'm working, I can work till 4 a.m. and not even notice.
Kevin, did a song ever give you a sleepless night, or just really? No,
I'll tell you what does give me sleepless nights. It's when I've shot a video for somebody else, and I don't. Sometimes I end up doing a video because I've got a great idea for a video, but I don't always like the song that much. I maybe like the artist, and I like what I'm doing, but you have to sit with that song and listen to it over and over and over and over and over again while you're editing it. And that drives you mad. You might be on a bus or on a train and you start singing it. And you don't want to be singing it, but you are singing because it will not, it's like going around in your head and it won't leave you alone. That drives me mad. Other people's songs that I've directed.
It seems to me that what I find, there are exceptions. I found a young female singer-songwriter the other night quite idly, and listened to two of her songs, and they were really, really lovely melodies. But what I find is most of the songs that are out there, Win Brits, whatever, they don't seem to have beautiful melodies anymore. Whereas, you know, the era you were talking about in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and actually not for me, the 90s, the songs, it's the melodies that I find beautiful in songs, whereas that doesn't seem to be important these days. So I don't know if it's just that I'm middle-aged now, and so I can't, you know, appreciate it. But that, to my ears, it sounds like that.
It's a difficult thing to generalize about, but I would agree with you to some extent. A lot of people seem to be making music that is based on drums or percussion and a general sort of groove. That's the most important thing, and be aiming for a sort of dance market. Or if there are tunes, there are some great tunes out of there. I mean, I was devastated when Burt Bacharach died the other day. Because his melodies were peerless in my estimation. And that, to a degree, that talent, that desire to create wonderful melodies. I agree with you, Vic. It's sort of, I don't say it's disappeared, it's just sort of slipped off the radar a bit. I'm sure it'll come back. Everything does. Everything goes round. And when people get bored with what's there now, they'll find something else, and maybe it'll be melody.
Can I ask, sorry to butt in, but it's an interesting discussion, this, not least because you, for a long time, Kevin, were kind of being paid to churn stuff out, a bit in a way that we might think about kind of a lot of modern music is a bit kind of churned out. I was interested in your choice of Somewhere in Hollywood, because it's such a contrast with what I guess were like 2.5-minute numbers that you were being asked to produce. Do you think that was a reaction against that kind of compressed format? Or are you almost as proud of the 2.5-minute numbers you did with 10cc? I
think Rob may be referring to the work you did for that American record label.
Yeah, exactly. The kind of...
Do you want to explain that, Rob?
Yeah, like I only know what I've read about, but it sounds like you were kind of, what was it, castanets and cats?
Okay, so that was one of the very first things we did in early Strawberry days. Pretend bands.
Yeah. In
other words. Bunch of session guys recording tracks, and they'd slap some silly name on it and put it out as this, you know, the Mad Bastards or whatever they used to call them, whoever they were. Crazy Elephant or something, I think was one. We did balk at the idea of doing that when we were first approached. Lol and I particularly was like, well, but then we kind of figured, we sort of thought about it, thought, well, it's an opportunity to get in the studio and try stuff. Okay, our names aren't going to go on it. People never hear of us anyway. So let's see what happens. It was fun, you know, but we were under no illusions that we were creating great music. It was like work experience, let's put it like that. And it was only after about 2 weeks that we felt used, but it was a hoot. It was a hoot, but we didn't get too precious about it. It was too early in our career to get precious about anything. It was like, you know, it was an opportunity to spend some time in the studio at somebody else's expense and learn how this thing called the studio worked. And I think it was one of those series of sessions in the very early days of Strawberry Studios, that gave us a taste for what we eventually used it for.
Your career has been a mixture of structured and chaos, and things going how you wanted them to and sometimes not. And I wondered if there was anything, not so much that you regretted, but looking back you think, perhaps I wish I'd taken that line rather than the one I did take.
Yeah, I suppose so. But strangely enough, they're more business things rather than creative things. There isn't anything that I did creatively that I wouldn't have done again, but there are decisions I made at a business level, like working with certain people at business level, that I thought, that wasn't a great idea. And that business way of doing things wasn't a great idea. But that's an area of expertise that I don't possess, it would appear. I'm not a businessman. I think our biggest screw up was probably making Consequences, strangely enough. But at the time, it seemed to be the only route out of something that was driving us or starting to drive us mental. But nevertheless, in retrospect, even though the album wasn't a success, it led us to somewhere else. It led us somewhere else. And had we have not have done that major folly, that probably wouldn't have happened. So everything kind of works out okay in the end.
To hear that your creative career has gone in a way that you're consistently happy with. That's good. That's really good to hear.
Pretty much. I haven't made a movie yet. I'd like to make a movie. I've written a couple of screenplays. I'm hoping I get to direct one. But looking back on what I managed to do so far, I'm quite happy with it. I'm not banging my head against a brick wall about anything.
I was dying to ask, do you ever have moments where you sort of pinch yourself or talk to your 12-year-old self or 14-year-old self and sort of think, I can't believe this has been my life?
Yeah, because I have met some interesting people and had a ball, generally speaking. Yeah, I occasionally think, that was great fun. What else would I have been doing? I can't think of anything else that I would rather be doing anyway.
Do you get recognised very often when you're out in public?
Not really. Occasionally I do, and it's really surprising. It's like I get, you're not who I think you are you? Oh no, fuck, I don't know. You think I am? People don't know what to say, and it's like really strange. People looking at you like, and it makes you a bit uncomfortable. So I can imagine if you are an enormous star, it must drive you potty. People looking at you like you're an alien or something. Like if you were Bowie or if you were Dylan or if you were Paul, or it must drive you absolutely round the twist. But when it does happen, it's kind of sweet. It's kind of sweet.
Kevin, what do you think when you're in a shopping centre or a pub or somewhere and you hear "I'm not in love," on the tannoy system? Do you ever kind of stop and have a moment? Do you just shrug?
The only time it's happened to me made a difference. I went to see Guardians of the Galaxy, right? And I didn't know. And I'm sat there and the film starts and that's familiar. What's that? And it goes on and what is that? I know that. I know that. What is that? And then it was I'm Not in Love. And I think, oh, fuck. My second thought was, I wish I'd written that song. It's nice. It's kind of nice. It's kind of nice because when that happens, it's like someone said, people still want to listen to you. And it's a long time ago, what we're talking about here. It's 40 odd years ago, 50 years ago, maybe. That's a long time. I mean, Graham, bless him, keeps it alive by touring his version of 10cc. And people still go to see and to listen. And it's different, though. They're not there for the people. They're there for the music. And that's kind of nice.
You occasionally have joined Graham on stage. I've been to see Graham. Is there any chance you're going to be doing that in the next couple of years? And is there anything in the world that would ever bring 10cc together?
I doubt it. On both questions, I doubt it. I've done my bit. I doubt it. I think if they had a boxing match in the middle of the stage,
you could reshoot Two Tribes.
We could do a version of Two Tribes, but we'd have to have considerably more effective weaponry, I think, if we were going to do it. No, it just wouldn't work, and I don't see the point. I don't know if people ask us to do that. You're going to get the band back together going, why the fuck we want to do that?
It's so special to us. It's so special. It means so much to us in our lives.
Did it sound like we were enjoying making the music?
Yes.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah.
Well, we were.
Thank you for joining us tonight, Kevin. We all appreciate it. you come across, Kevin, just as a very natural man who knows he's done very well.
Well, thank you. And who the fuck are you?